Hello, everyone. Today we are with Brian Mortimore, who is the Human Resources and Organizational Development Director at the Kent District Library out of Grand Rapids and obviously Kent County. And so with no more ado, I'll turn it over to Brian Mortimore. Hi, Brian.
Hi, how's it going? Thanks for having me. We've done this before in the past. You might remember me from other videos or other occasions a few years back when I did some workshops at, I think it was Cadillac. Cheryl, does that sound right?
Mm-hmm.
Here in Cadillac. Happy to be here again and happy to talk to you about a number of topics. We thought it'd be great to kind of do a sort of a primer on job descriptions, talk a little bit about some staffing, nuance things to consider, when it comes time to actually staffing a vacancy and interviewing, that kind of stuff. Performance management is always a hot topic. And so I want to share with you some of the really cool things that we're doing at KDL over about 4 years now. Very, very successful. And it's been written about in the library journal and whatnot. So many other libraries have adopted this method, and I want to tell you about that. And then also a little bit of a discussion on benefits, because I understand there's some interest in talking about that. So the interesting thing about this, of course, is that it's a webinar and it's a recorded webinar, and Cheryl's going to interrupt me at times and do her best to, ask questions about different topics that maybe the membership of your cooperative are interested in. And understand too, the scope of topics that we have outlined here today traditionally would be a 1 or 2 day workshop. And we're going to do all this, in probably the next 45 minutes or so. So it's going to be kind of like lightning rounds here with stuff. And the other thing is, at the end of this presentation, my contact information is there. And I'm always happy to talk to library directors from around the state. I get calls almost weekly or every other week from library directors with different questions or different issues. I'm happy to help you out however I can, okay? It's something we firmly believe in here, okay? So with that, I'm ready to move on to the first slide.
All right.
And we'll talk a little bit about what happens is you're going along, as I like to say, you're minding your own business, everything's fine, and then all of a sudden somebody comes in and says, oh, I took another job, and so now there's a vacancy that's going to occur, and you have to figure out what to do. And if you're like most organizations, your job descriptions are probably out of date. You probably have, some thoughts as to what the staffing configuration should be, but maybe you haven't acted on it. And it's one of those things that, time is of the essence, right? So I encourage everybody not to wait for this moment when somebody walks in and drops their letter of resignation on your desk and says, hey, I just took a job, across state or with this other outfit or whatever. Take a look at this stuff now. In fact, maybe that's a takeaway. Your first takeaway for this webinar is, do what I call the desktop fire drill. If you had somebody come in today and say they were leaving, are you ready to replace them? Are you ready to go through the process? And we're going to break that process down. So the first thing is you're going to want to consider the makeup of your current staffing and what it needs to be going forward, because there is no better time to make changes to your staffing configuration than when there is a vacancy, my opinion, okay? The reason I say that is because very often people have ideas on changes to their staffing. KDL just went through a huge staffing model change that we're not quite done with, but over the last year and the year prior to that, just talking about it leading up to it, sharing the philosophy and whatnot of how we're going to staff our branches. It's a big deal, and it's very unnerving to people, and because it's change, right? And whenever we talk about change, people have to think about learning new things and think about doing things differently than maybe they did the previous 6 or 7 years that they've been there. That's a big deal. So I like to say that, like, great example, your adult librarian just announced that they're going to be leaving, and you're thinking to yourself, I've always felt that we could actually use more youth librarian attention and programs. Well, this is a great time to kind of reconfigure that position. So that's what you do. You do it when there's a vacancy. Now, take a look at the job descriptions. Are they updated? At the bottom of all your job descriptions, there should be a little footnote that you have on there that indicates the last time it was updated. And that's a nice little thing to have because it gives you a real quick glimpse as to whether or not it's current. So I've got a job description, for example, in front of me, and it was last updated on February 21st of 2020, just before COVID hit. So what I'm looking at is a new job description for a Kent District Library. And at the top, and I think this is actually where we're going to switch to the next frame, but I want to mention that last bullet at the bottom of that last frame. Sorry, Cheryl. If you need samples, if you want samples of job descriptions, you know, there's nothing, you know, terribly proprietary about this stuff. I'm happy to share samples. I've shared samples of job descriptions with libraries all over the state of Michigan and other states as well. So always happy to share. I just like to encourage people to make them their own, because there's nuance to each of these job descriptions that really might reflect the culture of our organization.
Yes.
And it may or may not necessarily fit exactly with what you've got going on. So don't just, you know, say, oh, Mortimore gave me this job description and he's an HR guy, so it's got to be good. And therefore, you know, we're just going to change name at the top and make it ours. You know, spend a little time with it, I guess is what I'm saying. I think most
Brian, do you have a moment to scan through the types of positions that you have at Kent District Library? Just because we have a lot of smaller libraries, they're not going to have all those kind of positions. But if you have a basic clerk, or, you know, can you expand?
I will. For starters, in our branches, we actually simplified and did a number of cross trainings to create more generalized positions. So it used to be that we had adult librarians and youth librarians and teen librarians. Now we just have branch librarians. It used to be that we also had parapros that were adult parapros, teen parapros, and youth parapros. We no longer have parapros. We just have branch librarians. The reason that we did that is because we recognize the concept of equal pay for equal work. We've got all these people kind of doing the same sort of thing. We needed to bring them all together under one job description. So those job descriptions are a little more broad. Instead of having a circ assistant, we now have an assistant branch librarian role. And that's because the assistant branch librarian kind of does a little bit more activity that used to just exclusively be that of a librarian. So for example, it used to be that if somebody came and asked a circulation assistant a materials advisory question, even if the circ assistant had that knowledge or had that information, they would have to say, let me go get a librarian for you. And then they would, you know, turn and leave the customer and they'd go get somebody, and somebody would come back and answer the question. But we recognize that we have many people with many, many talents and many, many interests. And if somebody says, hey, I'm looking for a good romance novel, or I'm looking for a good book about World War II or whatever, can you recommend something? You know, and if I'm an assistant branch librarian, I ought to be able to say, yeah, I got a few things that I'd recommend that I've read. And that doesn't really encroach upon someone else's professionalism. I think it just adds greater customer service to our community. Now, if they want to go deeper, if they want to take a deep dive on some materials advisory, yeah, we get them a branch librarian. So in the branches, there's really three functions outside of the management roles. There's the branch librarian, there's the assistant branch librarian, and I'm going to talk more about that job description in a second because I've got it in front of me. And then we have the shelver position, which is also known as a page in many organizations, many libraries. So, so those are really the three that are existing in the branches. Now, because we have 360 employees, 19 locations, a centralized operation, in our centralized operation, we have collection development librarians that specialize in developing the collection for all of our 19 locations. And we have folks who are collection services representatives, who they're the folks that are doing the ordering of materials. I'm sorry, not so much the ordering. They're doing the labeling of materials, registering them into our system, into our database, They're doing the copy cataloging, that kind of stuff. And there was a time when we had 4 different job description titles in that collection services group. But once we did cross training, and once we recognized that we could do some cross training and pay people equally for equal work, that actually helped with our process flow in our department back there. It helped out a lot, because then if one person who specialized in a certain genre or something of copy cataloging went on vacation, everything didn't back up for that next week. Okay.
Thank you.
So those are the, the various librarian roles that we have at KDL predominantly. And then of course we've got like an IT department, HR department, finance department, marketing, communications. And then we got centralized programming and centralized outreach services and whatnot, community engagement. So those are things that we do largely because we're a large organization, and we have the resources to do so, and so we do.
Great.
But every library is not like that. I totally get that. So that gives you a nice little overview of who we are. Let's talk about the components of the job description. So at the very top of every job description is what I like to call the headline information. And this lists out the things like, what's the position title? What is the pay range that that position is paid in? Who does it report to? And do they supervise anybody? And if so, which job titles do they supervise? And so I'm looking right now at a job description for our assistant branch librarian. And it's pay range 2. And then next to pay range 2, it says non-exempt union, meaning it is a position that is not exempt from the Fair Labor Standards Act rules on paying overtime, meaning anybody in that job classification that works 40 or works more than 40 hours is going to receive time and a half because they're an hourly employee. And then it says union, because we have a union here, it acknowledges that they are a union covered position. There's a whole nother collective bargaining agreement that defines that, and that's like a whole nother workshop. So we'll stay out of that detail. And then it says, oh, go ahead.
No, I was laughing because I know it is.
Yeah. And for those of you who have not worked in a union environment, that's great. You just aren't familiar with that level of detail. You probably don't need to worry about it. If you are in a union environment, it's probably because you're most likely part of a county or a municipality, or maybe you are a larger system, because unions don't typically try to organize workforces of 3 or 5 or 7 people. So, but public sector employer, 363 employees, we got a great big bullseye on us. So, so we're going to have a union here, and that's not a bad thing. There's, personally, I like to remind people, I was born and raised in Saginaw, Michigan, and my dad worked for General Motors. I see the pros and cons, so in management, there's all kinds of details that you got to be concerned about. We talk about that on another webinar though. So then this position reports to our regional manager 2. We have 2 different types of managers that have shared oversight over multiple branches, and they are regional manager 1s and regional manager 2s. And the regional manager 2s have oversight of our assistant branch librarians. And then it indicates on the headline information that they don't supervise anyone, okay? The next thing is there's a job summary, and I'm gonna read this to you. And I want you to listen to how succinct this is. It says, under the general direction of branch management, performs a variety of services in support of patron service. Specific duties will vary in variety and volume depending on location. Doesn't sound real specific, does it? It's not meant to be real specific. It's meant to give a very simple job summary of what all's involved in this job. Now, underneath that is a whole list, a laundry list, if you will, of duties and responsibilities. And I'm not going to read all those to you, but generally the first item or 2 or 3 in some cases are the things that you're going to see the person doing the most of. Like on ours, the first one says, serves the public by checking in and out materials collecting money for lost or damaged materials, issuing new and replacement library cards, registering new patrons, and processing name and address changes. Okay, that's like one of the main things that they're doing. And then following that, it says things like responsible for collection maintenance duties, sorting and shelving of materials, emptying book drops, shelf reading, shifting materials, cleaning, that sort of stuff. Ensures circulation policies and procedures are followed, yada, 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 and so on and so forth. One of the pieces that's on this at the very end is performs other duties as assigned. We've all heard that. We've all laughed about that. We've all joked about that. That is like some of the best language that was invented by my HR brethren out there, because what happens on occasion is you might need somebody to take care of some issue that isn't normally covered by their, or you don't normally see them do that as part of their job. And I'm going to make up an example in this case where, let's say you wanted to ask an assistant branch manager to go, an assistant branch librarian to step outside and clean up a pile of trash that some kids were out there. They just came back from the Dairy Queen and they left all their wrappers and all their stuff and napkins sitting on a pile next to that bench that we have sitting outside the library. And you say, hey, I need you to take care of that. And they're going to say, wait a minute, Ryan, I'm looking at my job description. It doesn't say anything about cleaning up after kids in the parking lot. It says on here that I might be expected to clean at times, but that's implied that it's in the building. I mean, seems like somebody else needs to take care of this parking lot, not me. Well, the reality is you can't imagine every single scenario under which you might ask somebody to perform work. So other duties as assigned takes care of that. And it's also been supported in different legal proceedings where judges have recognized that other duties as assigned means just that. So that's a good piece to have. The next one that you're going to have on here is job requirements. I got to keep us moving through this stuff. Job requirements, usually the first thing you're going to have, the first bullet is going to be something along the lines of what the educational requirements are. In our case, it says high school diploma or GED required, okay? Ask yourself, whenever you're considering the job requirements, what do you truly need from somebody to do this job? And I know there's lots of debates about which degrees are of most value for different positions and whatnot. But over time, HR people like myself have recognized that there are many, many wonderful, high quality employees or job candidates out there who might not have the traditional means of education that we might have relied on 10 or 15 years ago. And if that's the case, you're going to want to know whether or not it's an absolute must for that educational requirement and or what the work experience requirements might be. You might say that you're going to require somebody to have 5 years of work experience. Well, does it have to be in a library? Because we hire some outstanding people who have 3 to 5 years of work experience working in retail management or retail shops or working at the local Walgreens or something along those lines, serving at Starbucks. They learn great customer service skills in these places. So that's another consideration. As you're contemplating all the different job requirements, think through that stuff. The last thing that we have on ours are the working conditions, and we try to describe what the working conditions are like. And in this case, it says generally we'll work in a normal office environment with minimal discomfort due to extreme temperatures, dust, or noise. Imagine if we had a job description at Kent District Library. Well, we do. Let me explain this one. Our bookmobile, for example, our bookmobile crew has to go out through all sorts of weather year round. So their working conditions acknowledges the fact that, they might on occasion be out in all kinds of weather, and they have to be comfortable with that because that's just expected with respect to the job. Okay, so keep in mind, if you feel like this is a lot of information to take in, just send me an email or give me a call. I'm happy to share job descriptions with you, and then you can just take a look at them for yourself.
Is that working conditions, Brian, also where you talk about the ability to lift a certain amount of weight?
Yes. Yep. Great point, Cheryl. We have pieces in here. We used to have a specific piece about a weight lifting requirement. We found that our lifting requirement was not necessarily consistent. It used to say 40 pounds and stuff. And, we provide people with all kinds of means to lift and move things with ergonomic devices and whatnot. What we found is generally the only time somebody lifts something really heavy is because they chose to lift something really heavy because they didn't want to unbox it and they felt confident in their ability to lift it. So then other people are like, oh yeah, I do that in like 3 loads, not a problem. You can do it however you want. I always remember years ago, years and years ago, somebody told me they thought they were getting carpal tunnel because whenever they would empty the book drop, they'd grab like 3 or 4 books with one hand like this. And it always hurt their wrist when they had to extend their hand like that to grab like 3 or even just 2 big books. And I remember this woman asking me, what do I do about that? I said, stop doing that.
Lift one book at a
I
time.
said, just do 1 book at a time, I said, we're not asking you to grab 3 books at a, it's like, so it's a library, folks, I mean, we can get the job done. We don't have to pick up 3 or 4 books at once. So,
Brian, is that where you would also put things like visual acuity? If you really wanted somebody who was sighted for the job as opposed to somebody who could not see? Is that where you would put that, or do you put that somewhere else?
Yeah, let me read some stuff to you. We have pieces in here about requires occasional travel between locations. We got, it says work hours are varied, including evenings and weekends, frequent sitting, standing in one position. And then we've got this, we actually worked with Disability Advocates of West Michigan to pin this next piece, which is actually at the bottom of every single one of our job descriptions. I'll read it to you, but again, if you ask for a job description, you're going to get a copy of it. It says the library employment environment typically requires extensive computer, keyboard, and mouse activity, in-person electronic and telephone communication skills. Meeting attendance at various branch and service center locations is expected. Self-identified mode of transportation is required. The preparation, loading, and carrying or moving of materials is commonly required for all KDL positions. Reasonable accommodations are available for individuals with disabilities. This job description is intended to describe the general nature and level of work being performed by a person assigned to this job. They are not to be construed as an exhausted list of all job duties that may be performed by a person so classified. Okay, so there's a few things here that very often you'll see on job descriptions, somebody will say, must have reliable transportation. Well, if you really think about it, that's sort of setting yourself up for a discrimination case, because let's say I don't own reliable transportation, but I live on the bus line and I can get myself to work just fine each and every day. Or maybe I'm legally blind and I can perform all the duties of this job description, but I can't drive myself to work and therefore I don't own reliable transportation, but I've got a spouse who is more than willing to bring me each and every day. Okay, so there's a lot of different things to consider there, and that's why when we worked with Disability Advocates of West Michigan, we kind of came up with that language because we wanted to not discourage persons with disabilities from applying for work with us, and we wanted them to know that, we stand ready to work towards making reasonable accommodations. And the whole topic of Americans with Disabilities Act and what is a reasonable accommodation, what is not, is a whole nother half-day workshop.
Okay, fair enough. Shall we go to the next slide?
I think we move on. Yep.
Okay.
All right. So you also have to consider, compensation issues when it comes time to staff that position. And there's a lot of different sources for this. I mean, MLA publishes an annual survey that gives you some ideas to what the compensation should be. You can conduct a survey informally yourself. You can contract with others to conduct more specific surveys specific to your area. Because as I like to say, you know, what do we care what a librarian in Bay City makes or a librarian in Saginaw makes? We're more interested in what a librarian in Traverse City earns, or what a librarian in Cadillac, or you know, one of those communities, Gaylord, for example, where, you know, maybe we're a part of, because we have a recruitable range. And so we're interested in those market rates. So pay ranges represent both a beginning and the ending of the pay range. For example, let's say you've got an entry level position that starts at minimum wage, which I forget what minimum wage is off the top of my head. I want to say like $9.75 or something like that, or $9.36. Let's just say you got a position that starts at $10 an hour. Okay. And then it caps out at 15. That represents your pay range for that position, $10 to $15 an hour. So the middle of your pay range in that case is $12.50. So what you would do is you would kind of compare your pay range and average pay to that of others. And then you would have to make a decision as to whether or not you're competitive. I always remember talking with a library on the east side of the state that wanted some advice on pay ranges. And they said, you know, we really can't afford to pay our entry level people more than minimum wage, but we just lost an entry level person who actually has a librarian degree. She went to work for Burger King because Burger King can offer 40 hours a week and a benefit package. And I was blown away by that. And this was like 3 years ago, thinking 40 hours a week and a benefit package, you know. So that's what we're up against. And we're going to talk a little bit about benefits here in a minute too. But the environment is competitive. Now, prior to COVID, at least in West Michigan, the unemployment rate was about 2.5%, which really means it's a buyer's market out there. And that has helped to drive wages up and up and up. And so you're sitting there as a small library and you're saying, Brian, I'm not KDL. I don't have, you know, access to the bank like you guys do, or, you know, I mean, because, you know, we're small and we don't have the revenue, we don't have the tax base and whatnot. What do I do? Well, you got to make the working conditions work well for people. And because then if you do, and you become that employer of choice for them, then they're happy to be there. They might supplement their income elsewhere, but they're happy to be there and they're happy to be a part of your library system. So pay rates are part art and part science. Coming up with a pay rate, you know, is you have the science of the data that's out there. And then at the end of the day, you're going to have to talk to your board about that. And your board's going to say, this is what we can afford. And so then you're going to have to do your best to make that work. But I like to make compensation a priority, because if compensation and benefits are not a priority, then it doesn't matter how many books and how many movies we have available to check out to people, because we're not going to have good people here to provide that customer service. So, you know, we don't want to lose our people to Burger King. So we got to be careful, right?
Yep.
Nothing against Burger King. They got great onion rings. So, so we talked about pay rates. We talked about, pay rates. There's the basic increase that can happen, and that typically happens at the first of the year or at the beginning of a budget cycle. And then there's something known as supplemental adjustments. So let's say you've got somebody that started out this year, and maybe I'm making this up. Let's say you're going to issue a 2% pay increase this year to your workforce. But you've got this person who's just knocking it out of the park and they're doing really, really good work. You might decide, you know, to help ensure that we retain them long term, we want to give them a supplemental increase to help move them up in their pay scale. After all, the last person that left that job might have been paid, you know, at the top of the pay scale. And maybe now the budget will allow for you to pay this person a little bit more because they're at the starting of the pay scale. So you can look at your budget and you can consider things like that. You just have to have good justification for why you're issuing a supplemental increase to one individual, not to another. If you don't issue them to other people, then you need to be ready to defend that. If for some reason somebody says, hey, uh, you gave, and I'm making this one up, you gave supplemental increases to these two people, but not the other three of us. And the other three of us are all, over the age of 40. And these other two people are all under the age of 25. And it appears as though you're discriminating based on age. So, Madam Employer, what do you have to say about that? And so you can see how this can get a little tricky at times. So I always caution people that you can do it. And we have done it at Kent District Library. And it's an important thing to help retain some of our stars, right? We want to make sure that we hang on to people. But you got to be ready for that too,
and also ready for union pushback, probably,
well,
right?
if you've got a union, you just can't do it with a union.
Right.
I mean, because your collective bargaining agreement defines exactly how people are compensated.
Okay, so you're talking managers.
Yes, non-union staff. Yeah.
Got it.
So if you've got a union, then it's possible your collective bargaining agreement allows for you to make these decisions, but it's most likely that if it does, it involves you having a discussion with your union about it prior to you implementing.
Right.
Because they might demand a bargain around that. Okay, good catch, Cheryl. Internal equity, I like to talk about that after talking about market rates. I call it equal pay for equal work. I think that's something that almost everybody believes in, and why wouldn't they? If we're doing maybe they're two slightly different jobs, but they both involve the same kind of activity or the same kind of work, same kind of skill sets, same competencies. Why would we not pay those the same? So we want to make sure that we have good internal equity, and that's for managers and directors to kind of do their homework when they're looking at their compensation across the board. And then ask yourself, what's the pay progression or the journey to the top look like? If you've got a pay range that's extensively large and you're real proud of where it caps out at because you feel like, that's really good money for the profession. Okay, great. But what if it takes somebody 15 years to get there at the rate that you're given 2% pay increases? Then it's not such a great deal, right? So that's another thing that you need to consider. Cost of living. I always get asked about, what are you doing for cost of living? And cost of living, and this is my personal commentary, it's this old archaic method of determining what annual increases ought to be. And it really kind of ignores market data. What it does is it relies on the general costs associated with certain goods and services and how they have responded to inflation in the environment. And, there's a lot of old school thinking out there that, whatever the cost of living is, maybe it's 1.5%, maybe it's 1%, maybe it's 1.75%. We're going to tie our pay increases to that cost of living. Okay, great. That's very objective. I give you credit for being objective. But ask yourself, does doing cost of living meet the goal of attracting and retaining good people to our workforce? If it does, great. But it's very likely that, like many, many libraries, they have to recognize that there's market rates out there that have changed dramatically in the last 7 to 10 years, and they need to kind of take notice of that. Merit pay has different opportunities and challenges with it. For example, Cheryl, you're knocking it out of the park. You're doing a great job. We want to give you another increase based on your merit. And that increase might be an increase to your base salary. Or, what, Cheryl, maybe we can't do an increase to your base salary, but we want to issue you, a $200 bonus on your anniversary date.
Bring it on, Brian.
Yeah, right. So, which is wonderful and all, but the challenge with that is you got to be pretty clear about why somebody is getting something and somebody else might not be getting something for the reasons that we already discussed. Right. So I'm a fan of merit pay for the right reasons, and I disdain merit pay for all the other reasons and challenges that come with it. So just it's something to kind of weigh and think about before you actually implement. So why don't we move on to the next slide? And on the next slide, when it comes up, we are going to talk about performance management. And I'm going to kind of zip through this fast because I know this wasn't, a primary item that you had on your list for me to talk about today, but it's something that everyone's interested in whenever I bring it up. There's a lot of challenges to traditional approaches to doing performance reviews or performance management. And there's the recency effect, meaning that even though it might be an annual review, we can't help but reflect on the last 45 days more than anything because hey, it's human nature. It's what we remember. Then there's what I call halos and horns, meaning that somebody either gets, all high ratings because we think really highly of them, or they get all really low ratings. That was the horns. They get really low ratings because we just don't feel good about that person. And then there's the central tendency effect, which basically says if I've got a 5-point Likert scale, everyone's getting a 3 because that's right down the middle and that feels safe to me as a supervisor. I'm not really given good feedback, and feedback isn't always honest, and sometimes in fact it's inflated a little bit because it's an unnerving event. This is an anxiety producing event for both the employee and the supervisor. Think about how many times you have a performance evaluation that's scheduled and you build up all that anxiety, and guess what happens the morning of that? Your supervisor sends you a note, says, hey, sorry, we got to reschedule. Well, why do you think that is? I mean, I've talked to countless employers about this across different industries, and we all agree. The reason why is because nobody really wants to do them. It's just too much, and I mean, you sit down with even a really good employee and you're afraid that you're going to forget some of the really great things they did and not honor them properly. And so that's a problem. Let's go to that next slide. I'll tell you what we're doing at Kent District Library and what we started a couple years back. We did not invent this, by the way. We love inventing things, but we did not invent this. I actually, at a National Society for Human Resource Managers conference, one of my team members brought this item back, this concept back, and she just helped us develop it for our KDL workforce. And it's called the check-in process. We call it a check-in process because we're a library, and that just kind of makes it fun, right? But it's checking in with your employees instead of checking in materials. And it's so simple. We used to have this 3 or 4 page performance review that got sent out to people every year, and all the anxiety, and then the debates about whether or not I got enough 4s or enough 3s, or whether or not I've got some things to work on or what my goals are, yada yada yada. What this does is we say on a minimum of a quarterly basis. So right there, I tend to lose people. Wait a minute, I got to do something 4 times a year now instead of once. Wait for it. On a minimum of 4 times a year, quarterly, we want you to sit with your employee privately, one-on-one. I want you to sit across the table and say, hey, I want to do a check-in with you. Just want to check in with you and ask you, hey, what are you working on right now? And you're going to tell me what you're working on because it's what you're doing right now, and maybe it's oh, same old. That's fine. Is there anything that's standing in your way or getting in your way of accomplishing some of the things that you got as projects? And what do you need from me as your supervisor? It's really those 3 questions followed by recognition, recognizing the employee for the good work that they're doing. And let's move on to that next slide, Cheryl. When you do this and you do it well, it kind of looks like this. Okay, so here's a Q&A back and forth, an example. So I'll do the Q's and Cheryl, you do the A's, okay? Can you read those for me?
Yep.
I say, hey, Cheryl, what are you working on, or what's your immediate priority right now?
Well, I'm trying to get more teen volunteers to help with summer reading club registration.
Oh, yeah, do you not have enough, or where's that at?
Not yet. Last year had twice as many.
Wonder if that's a COVID thing. It's hard to say, but would it help if I placed a call to some of the friends of the library to get the word out and let them know that we're looking for more volunteers?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay. How about I do that? I'll check back with you after I call the friends. And listen, I want you to know that I appreciate all your hard work on this. It may be challenging now, but I know that we're going to have a great summer, and large part is because of your efforts and how you pull everybody together. So thank you very much for that. Okay. Now, how tough did that feel? Not tough at all, right?
Hard.
Super easy. Okay, that's the first of 2 steps involved in a check-in. Go to that next screen. The check-in process is a 2-step process. Very often, I follow up with managers, yes, KDL managers, who fail to do this next part. And that's logging it in. And here's what a log looks like. Okay, June 2nd, met with April, in this case Cheryl, and discuss concerns around summer reading clubs, specifically the lack of teen volunteers. I contacted the friends to put the word or put out a call for help. April has been very busy ensuring the success of the program, developing promotion and securing prizes. Well, we're assuming that you talked about that in our conversation too. So that's the login part. So now the next quarter, when I go to do a check-in with you, and let's say I've been really busy and I've not spent a lot of time with you, before I do my check-in, I'm going to pull up my log and I'm going to say, what did we talk about last time? And I'm going to see, oh, Cheryl and I talked about summer reading club. And oh yeah, that issue with the volunteers got all sorted out because, 2 things happened. The friends, put the word out. And plus I know Cheryl started talking to a couple of her traditional teen volunteers, and they put the word out at the school just before the end of the school year. And we had 5 new teens, So now I'm going to come into my next, law or check in, and I'm going to ask those same questions. How's it going? What are you working on? And she's going to tell me, and I'm going to say, hey, I want to acknowledge, last quarter you did a great job getting the teen volunteers to come out for this thing. And that really helped with the success of summer reading club, and how are we looking at completers? That's something that's important to us, not just people who signed up, but those who complete. Are you getting the word out on that? And what do you need from me on that? Or whatever it is that Cheryl's working on next. Now, if you think about it, this is far easier and far more pleasant of an experience because it honors the employee. For starters, it assumes the best in people. If there's a problem with their performance, that's like a 2-day workshop that we do as well. But if there's a problem with performance, then we address that. I mean, you can address it in here, but there's going to be follow-up. There's going to be goal setting, and there's going to be deadlines for that and whatnot. And if necessary, there can be coaching, and then if coaching doesn't work, progressive discipline and whatnot, leading up to a not excluding termination. That's kind of the ugly side of HR, but it's the stuff sometimes we have to deal with. But for the most part, the vast majority of your employees, the vast majority are working hard, they're doing good work, and we're honoring them with this system as opposed to sitting across from them once a year, going over a laundry list of things. So flip the page. I'll tell you how our folks like it. I think my slides might be out of order. Well, at any rate, our managers love it. In a little while, when you see a slide with a bunch of screaming fans, just remember this moment. That was our managers loving the new system, okay? So my apologies for that. I want to talk to you a little bit about employment testing because I get a lot of questions on this, and I'll be brief here because I know we're getting short on time. But several years ago, I was reading a Time magazine in Tim Hortons. And that Time magazine, on the cover of it, it asked the question, what's your XQ or your XQ factor? And the main article in that Time magazine was all about the fact that all kinds of different industries are doing employment assessment testing, and they have been for about the last decade. And I knew this because I'm a pretty active follower of the Society of Human Resource Managers. And I mean, every professional magazine they've published in the last decade has some reference to employment assessments and assessment tools that are used. And why? Why? Because when we use traditional systems of application and resume, and then we interview somebody and we decide who to hire, what do? We all hold our breath, right? We hold our breath and we wait and we watch and see how the next 6, 8, 12 months plays out to decide whether or not we really hired somebody that is going to work out. And we know what it's like when somebody doesn't work out. It's painful. It's painful to us as a supervisor, it's painful to their coworkers, and it's painful to them. And that's part of this that I want to drive home as well. I know this because after I read that Tim Horton's Time magazine, I sat there thinking about what a shame that libraries don't have some kind of assessment tool specific to the public library industry. And with that, I was then inspired to find a local research company that could help us develop that so that we at KDL would have that tool. But I didn't want it to just be a KDL tool. I wanted it to be available to libraries everywhere. So we funded the research. We worked with a group of industrial organizational psychologists out of Carmel, Indiana, and they actually facilitated the design and development of a tool that was specific to public libraries based on feedback and focus groups made up of people from libraries. In fact, they even sat in a library for a couple of different shifts and observed the work of people so that they could come to understand all the nuance of that job. And then with that, we got many libraries. In fact, it might be that some of your libraries participated in this research. Many librarians around the country and even one in Canada participated in this research. We had over 400 participants over the course of about a year participating in this research, where they self-identified, and their supervisors identified the kinds of skill sets that are most effective at being successful in the public library setting. So with that, we created the industry's very first library employment assessment tool, which is pretty slick. It's pretty cool.
Okay.
Have you taken it, Cheryl? Have you seen it?
No, I just pulled up the link on my other computer here,
Oh
but we'll
yeah.
pull it up in a minute. Huh?
So yeah, as you take a look at that, you'll scroll through that and it's going to identify a number of different constructs. Thank you. Yeah. Bookmarkhr.com. Again, we work for a library, so we got to be cute, right? But we call it the bookmark because a bookmark helps you, the hiring supervisor, get right to that location that you want to be at, right? And that location is hiring the right person. So if you're a hiring supervisor and you've got a position and you're looking at maybe 3 or 4 different candidates, then what you can do is you can go on bookmarkhr.com and you can order up. And by the way, this is the really great thing. The first 2 companies I interviewed that said they could do this for us and libraries everywhere, they were talking about traditional pricing models for employment assessment tools, which traditionally start around $75 or more an assessment. But the group that I settled with agreed and they agreed to this largely because they recognize there's no other library assessment tool out there. But they agreed to host it and do this for $20 an assessment. So what does that mean to you? You don't have to have a budget for this. You don't have to anticipate turnover. But if you do have turnover, maybe it's the first time you've had turnover in the last 2 years, you can go to bookmarkhr.com, register, and you can purchase. Let's say you've got 3 candidates that you're trying to decide between. For $20 an assessment or $60, you can have them take this assessment, and it's very seamless. Once you register, you enter their email addresses and whatnot. They get an alert saying that you've applied for a job from such and such a library, and we're asking that you complete this assessment. Then it comes back with a red light, yellow light, or green light overall score, and we all know what those colors mean, right?
Right.
Then it breaks it down individually based on those different 12 constructs that we have that are all listed there. Constructs like teamwork and ability to problem solve or provide great, having a customer focus, a servant's heart, that sort of thing. Lots of different things that you would naturally find valuable in a library employee. So as I like to tell everybody, I was technically the very first person to take this assessment. It came back and told me right away that I should not work directly with the public in a public library. And at first I was a little offended, but then it occurred to me, no, that's That's not what makes my heart sing. That's not the thing that I enjoy. I like working in behind the scenes, helping managers and directors and others achieve the goals that they want to achieve, keeping systems up and running, keeping buildings staffed. That's the kind of stuff that makes my heart sing. So if I took an assessment on HR, it would probably indicate that, you know, this is what I would do well at. Okay, at least I would hope it would. So we've had lots of people take this. In fact, at last count, over 60 libraries around the nation have registered to use it and have used it in various forms. I've gotten feedback from around the country. I always remember my favorite one of all was the director in Pennsylvania, one of the libraries in Pennsylvania, that wrote to me and said, I got to tell you, I had 3 pages that all applied for the same CERC position. We had a little hesitation about each one, but we couldn't exactly put our finger on it. We gave them your assessment. The assessment came back with feedback on each of them that was spot on and was able to codify exactly what we felt and thought about each one. And the beautiful thing about that, and this is the part I absolutely love, is she said, we did offer the job to one person, but to the other 2, we shared the feedback. And now they have goals based on that feedback that they're working on. So that in the next 6 to 12 months, when the next CERC position opens up, they'll be in a better position to take that promotion. And I thought, man, that's great, because what we're doing now is we're creating dialogue, in this case with an internal candidate, about how you can advance. I didn't pick you today, but in the future, if you want to advance, this is something that I feel you need to improve upon. In fact, the bookmark says it as well, you know, so it's a great tool. I would encourage people to use it.
That's wonderful,
If
Brian.
you're
What a
inclined.
wonderful
Yeah,
tool.
thank you.
Yay.
Thank you. Yeah, yeah.
Is there,
So
should we go there, or should we just let people go on their own?
they can go on their own. Yeah, I don't want to like turn this into a big bookmark presentation, but
Okay.
if you're, I mean, maybe take this bookmarkhr.com, write it down, pin it on your bulletin board or whatever. Next time you got an opening, you know, go check it out, or check it out when you got a spare minute. You got questions about it, give me a call. I'm obviously a big fan. We use it all the time. We use it for every public facing library position there is. And I'm telling you, it helps root out bias too, because, you know, there's an implicit bias that happens whenever we as reviewers of job candidates look at that resume. We look at that resume, we see certain things we like, we see certain things we don't like. And I remember one time I was hiring some subs, and I had like 5 subs take this assessment. And I was trying to decide which ones to interview. And there was one in particular that, based on the resume, I really kind of liked. I thought, you know, this person looks really good. But I took, you know, that bookmark. They didn't have any library experience, but they had different experience. They took the bookmark, and the bookmark came back red light, you know, and it listed out the specifics. This person has a tendency, you know, to not want to work in teams or not work with others, and da 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 da. And it went on and on. And I sat there like flabbergasted, and I was looking back at the resume thinking, I would have interviewed this person. And holy cow, I might have hired them. And I might have hired them over one of these other candidates that came back with a green light.
Wow.
So I elected not to interview that person with the red light. I interviewed the other 3 that had green lights. Hands down, no problem. I hired all 3 of those other subs, and they've worked out fantastic. So our goal of stuff like this is we want to reduce turnover. We want to ensure that we're hiring good people that are going to work well with others. We want to remove implicit bias from the hiring process. And these are all good goals that most people can really get behind. So there's that happy.
Yay!
That's our feedback from the management on the performance management tool.
You've
And you
got
can
happy
tell,
managers.
yeah, it looks like they're all from Great Britain too, it looks like. Yeah, stock photo, I think, from a soccer contest or something. But yeah. But yeah, so that's it. And we kind of are at the end of our presentation. But that's my contact information there. Probably the number one thing people reach out to me for is job descriptions. So if you've got job descriptions that you want to take a look at or whatnot, you know, I'm not in a good position to sit with you and go over them necessarily, but I am in a good position to make sure you have ours and you can say, okay, this is what KDL does and this is their requirements, and you know, this is how they framed it all. So, but I'm always happy to take a call too. So,
Excellent, excellent information that you've shared today, Brian. We're so grateful that you had the time to do this for us.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
That tool is going to be very, I think there's a lot of people that don't know about that tool. And I for one, hired a lot of people when I worked for, when I worked at Kent District Library and when I worked for the state. And I would have loved to have that tool because there was nothing like it, as you know.
Right,
So,
right.
That's excellent.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for evidence-based selection, meaning that you've got tools that are assessing people's aptitude, their personality, all that. And, you know, the scores come back and then those scores kind of dictate who you interview. It helps root out some of the, you know, the good old boys network, as you might call it. And, you know, like who you knew or whatnot, or, and that's pretty uncomfortable at times. You know, if you think about it, there still is a lot of that. It's not like, you know, 50 years ago, somebody wanted to get their child hired somewhere. They would walk in with them and they'd vouch for them. And then their employer would say, yeah, go, you know, pick up a shovel and get on the line or whatever. And they would just hire them like that. And then due to discrimination and preferential treatment and all that, then, you know, there were standards adopted around, you know, applications and resumes, but you still have some of that bias leak into the process. Okay. And there always will be some. This doesn't eliminate everything. Right. But what this does is it takes it to the next level. And this says, look, you know, to work here, you're going to have to demonstrate an aptitude, you know, for this kind of work.
Nice.
And for all the right reasons. So, yeah. Happy to help out, and I think we got another one of these that we're going to do in the future, right?
All right. Well, I will be back with you, Brian, but for right now, have a great rest of your day, and thank you so much for recording today.
You betcha.
Appreciate
Thanks so much.
Okay.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. We're right up against your 4:15 time. I'm sorry.
I know, and all my alarms are going off. I'm just going to end the meeting because I can't find the stop recording. So thank you so much, Brian. All right, bye.